Thank you, Andrew, for being here.
Welcome.
Yeah, I was just saying a little while ago, glad to have you back. This is gonna be a much better conversation for all who are here. And it's a very interesting topic. I've really been thinking about this actually ever since you first kind of posed it, and then after our conversation and a little bit, it's been very intriguing looking into this particular topic.
Yeah, it's the problem when you look through things through a historic lens is we often think like, well, what might have been? How could this have looked in a different way? Is it the case that if this event didn't happen or there was no chain fire from it, that we would have an entirely different society, and what would that look like? So I do think
Yeah,
that it's worth discussing these. I consider them key to my political ideology, in fact.
yeah. Yeah, okay. Well, I mean, it's gonna be yeah, I'm actually to be completely blunt. I'm actually very curious to hear your thoughts. Last time around, maybe I just didn't have a good attitude about it. I don't know what it was. But yeah, so when we briefly talked a little while ago, I think it's kind of a good idea for us to both kind of maybe just briefly share our perspectives. That way we kind of get that fully out there without really anything. So if you want to maybe just kind of maybe lay out your case, I don't speak for 5+ minutes, whatever, and just kind of lay out where you're coming from. That way
Well,
I
I'll
can
try
hear it.
to I'll try to actually keep it brief. Um, so the basic idea here is erosion of authority. We're just talking about the erosion of authority. That's it. So when I think about how we think about rights, things like rights and entitlements and things like this in modernity, most of that comes from the idea that we're individualistically kings. We're all individually in charge. We all individually have authority. And I think that that's led to some serious logical issues and logical problems socially with society. When I track this back, these ideas back to John Locke and to others who began the idea of natural rights absent a God, right? They're just kind of built into the structure, the fabric of reality. You can see the pathway being paved to him from reformers like Martin Luther, like John Calvin, and like others who had these kind of various ideas of where authority came from and the ideas of authority. And so I don't think that that's necessarily healthy. It's not really healthy for people. We're pack animals, right? We think it collectively to a degree, and we act collectively because we have to. But when we've kind of eliminated those modes of individual or any sort of collective action for individualism based on authority, like the individual is the ultimate authority on things, I think that's where we see a deviation. So I'm not arguing whether or not it was a good thing or a bad thing that that Protestants went against the Catholic Church. Okay, so uh, my argument is structured around the idea that they did do that, and there was outcomes that came from that that ultimately I don't think have been good socially for the West over a long period of time. We look at the United States, it's a really good example of this, of where we see this axiom really kind of first applied at the governmental level. So the axiom that we're talking about here is we hold these truths to be self-evident. That's an axiomatic claim. Um, the reason that this axiom matters so much is because it's not a justified axiom. They don't give a justification for it. They're not telling you where it came from and why, right? They do use the term God, that's true, but they're not really giving you reasons in this, and they're just saying this is self-evident. Well, the problem with that is when you decide that things become evident or they're self-evident or they're axiomatic, you can apply that to everything. I think that it's self-evident you should get married. I think it's self-evident that fans is fine, part of people's freedom. I think it's self-evident that we can have, if we want porn, and et cetera, et cetera. And one of the problems is there's no check on it. When you look at Christian ethics operates in a series of tradition because Christian ethics itself, at its form base, is a form of virtue ethics. it has virtue ethics as its kind of prime examples of how you're supposed to do things or not supposed to do things. Everything is formulated that way. A lot of those views are highly Aristotelian, and that's why the Catholic Church adopted a lot of Aristotelian views. And Martin Luther, who was the prime reformer, hated Aristotle. I mean, he absolutely loathed him. He considered his ideas to be crackpot ideas, and he rejected them by and large. And the reason he did that is because he wanted to move things over to the sense of self again, right? Me, the act of consciousness, or conscience, things like this all come from me. And so if we trace this forward now to again the United States and its formation from the Protestant Reformation, and the United States by and large was formed by Protestants, many of whom had a lineage that were escaping persecution from the Catholic Church in Western Europe. You'll see these axioms come into play. And this is remember that in the United States at its formation, the revolutionaries were the ones who were the progressives at the time. The king would have been considered the conservative, right? So if this is the case, the king is operating still on tradition, operating on these traditions and ethics and traditions and how kings are even formed and things like this. The revolutionary idea is coming from the people who revolted against England, in this case, the United States. And when you see this formed in the Constitution, it secularizes under the First Amendment is the idea that we need to be tolerant towards religion. And the reason that we had to be tolerant towards religion is because each individual state had their own religion. And so, since they all had their own religion under a Protestant sect, they were concerned that the government might favor one of these Protestant sects over another Protestant sect. And so they negotiated with them as a compromise. And the compromise came essentially after the Articles of Confederation when they were trying to formulate the Union itself. The Articles of Confederation were like a libertarian's dream, right? So when they take these articles and the Articles of Confederation formulate into a union, the First Amendment is the guaranteed compromise, and then later became more of a secular document for the idea of religious tolerance. Well, those are ideas from John Locke, not Christian ideas, religious tolerance and things like this, right? It's actually counterproductive and stupid, to be honest with you. Religious tolerance is a terrible idea. And so those are the ideas of how we get into the secular ideologies, essentially. And I'm just paraphrasing this to make it easy, right? From the historic prism of the Reformation to the Enlightenment formulation of the United States, et cetera. So those are the basic ideas around it.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I hear that part. When I was doing research and I was just kinda gathering information, so, from your perspective, I understand kind of, because you have an Orthodox background, so can the challenge of issue of authority or things like that,
Well,
the
and also,
church.
and then I guess I'll leave it at this too. I'm sorry, I didn't, but you just
Okay,
brought
go
this
ahead,
up. Is
go ahead.
for me, I have a different story when it comes to how I came to the faith than I think many people do. I didn't have some jolt or some huge spiritual experience or something like this.
You
I
have a Protestant
came
background, right?
Yeah, I do. A
Yeah, okay, yeah,
non-denominational Protestant background, in fact.
yeah. I
Um,
was watching you on, what's his name? I saw a couple of your shows with Jared from
mhm,
Louder with Crowder. Yeah, I watched a couple. They were
yeah,
actually some good episodes I saw. Yeah,
yeah,
go ahead, keep going.
Gerald
Yeah,
Apologetics.
yeah.
He's a good guy.
Yeah, he seems
Um,
pretty cool.
and
Yeah.
he's a Protestant. And of course, my closest friends are Protestant. My whole family is Protestants because
Mhm.
this is the culture that they're in, the ethos that they're in. Um, but I don't have any problems with Protestants. Obviously, I would be a very lonely world I lived in if I didn't have any relationship with Protestants. So, but I came to the faith logically. It was a series of logical demonstrations that I found to be very compelling and convincing that moved me over to the ideas of Christian ethics first, and then from Christian ethics to the belief second. So I didn't come to it the same way a lot of people do through spiritual revelation. I look at it through a different lens. And so it's not an orthodox background that informs me of these things. In fact, it's the fact that I was informed of these things that led me to orthodoxy.
Mm, gotcha. Yeah, let me just kinda just give my little thoughts of where I'm coming from on this, and then, I have an interesting story of how I became a Christian too. If we get to that, I'll try to condense it 'cause I can kinda get long-winded. Um, when I was looking at the Protestant Reformation and, especially with Martin Luther, I'm not Calvinist or Reformed per se, but, I understand the roots, and, from what I was understanding when I was looking at Martin Luther, originally when he wrote his 95 Thesis, he wasn't trying to change everything, he was just basically trying to start a conversation about the abuses of indulgences and, um, really what was going on with the power trip with the Catholic Church, and, how many people back then, I mean, you probably, I mean, I'm not saying probably you, I'm sure you do, because this is your area, you study a lot of this stuff, um, but knowing history that during that time, the Catholic Church was very much in control even over, um, different type of governments, and so to even challenge, the Catholic Church back in those days was a big thing, and so from my understanding, Martin Luther originally, when it first began, it wasn't what it turned out to be. It was just more of addressing the abuses of, the indulgences. But then as time progressed, then other issues of wanting the Bible to be, like how we have today. It's so, accessible, right? Many people back then couldn't read the Bible because it was, only written predominantly in Latin. Some people were trying to do it before. Um, I think a lot of what made Martin Luther really compared to, 'cause there were some people who were before him that were protesting, but they weren't very successful because I think you probably would agree that with Luther, because of the time of the printing, was a very kind of newer thing, and because he was able to get his translation out and many other things out, that the word spread around in the German language, and it kinda caused, a stir, and then more people started kinda slowly challenging different things about the Catholic Church, but from my background, because 'cause I'm just, kind of probably how you I think when I was watching some of your conversation with, Jared, I'm a non-denominational Christian, I've been a Christian since the age of 6. I love reading the Bible, and so when I think about, what was going on back then, it's so different than today, because today, no matter what flavor of religion you are, we have access to the Bible, we have it in multiple languages, and in my research, and again, just from stuff I saw, the positive stuff now, not necessarily the negative, we can get into the negative, I know that, but the positive stuff came out, it was a lot of, like, things of, like, literacy, education, schools, many universities like Harvard, Yale, hospitals, many things that productively over the last few hundred years, 4 or 500 years, that good things have come out of this throughout the world. Now, the negative, of course, because my area of areas is counter cult apologetics. I've been in apologetics since the 1990s, and so I deal a lot with cults and things like that, which sprang up in the 1800s. Mostly, a lot of these guys. Um, I understand the dangers of
You talking
independent
about
thinking.
during the spiritual revival?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
your Joseph Smith, your Ellen G. White, your, Charles Russells, and a lot of those people back in the day, and then we had a lot in the 1900s as well. So I understand, that. I understand the dangers and the cautions of that. Um, you know, I think also too, just looking back with the Catholic Church, because 'cause they're different now, but there's still there's still some similarities, though. They're just not like they used to be in world domination of control, but, um they really suppressed a lot of stuff, and so I can understand how a lot of people were protesting early on with wanting people to be able to at least have access to, get to the Bible, and so I think that's some of the key areas that I was looking into that, I know obviously, and even like last conversation, I mean, I kept using the word sin, and I understand that people made fun of me on that. I still think that was still somewhat accurate. We're all selfish, we're all at times, prideful, fleshly, whatever, and we wanna do things our own way, and so I know from the Protestant Reformation, what took place later, that really caused that kind of mindset for a lot of people that went the wrong way, and unfortunately from that, there's been a lot of things that weren't good that have come from that.
Yeah, you can't. I think I told you in DMs, right? I can't tell you unequivocally that everything that came out of the Protestant Revolution was bad. There's lots of things. For instance, the coalition with Enlightenment thinkers was likely the thing that abolished slavery in the West
Yeah,
long before it
right,
did within the Eastern countries and even Eastern Christian nations. There was definitely good things that came out of the Reformation. I'm not going to deny that that's the case. Um, but I think that that could be said about every ideology which exists is the problem, right? Nothing's built in a vacuum. So you could say kingdoms are unjust and kings are unjust, but it's not true. Some kingdoms are unjust and some kings are unjust, but many good things came out of many good kingdoms, right? Maybe the
right,
only ideology I can think of that you could just make the blanket statement that the ideology itself just only produced bad things is possibly communism. But even then, I think it's a stretch. I think you would be hard put to the test to say everything that ever came out of it was bad. So that's not really what I'm looking at. What I'm looking at is the broader scope of it. And the idea just comes down to this. It comes down to the idea of authority. And
yep,
much of the things that you're talking about and referencing that you would consider the good things are coming from the idea of questioning, attacking, and having revolution against authority. Now, I think that schools and things like this would have been a natural byproduct of the invention of the printing press. I'm not sure that I would attribute those to the Enlightenment or to the Protestant Reformation. I think that oftentimes technology gets conflated with morality. The technology is now here. People begin to use the technology. It reforms the social integration system of how people deal with reality. But that doesn't necessarily mean that that's a byproduct of the morality or the Christian ethics themselves of Protestants. It is true many Protestants demanded literacy and things like this, but again, that could have been more a product of the time than it was the actual ethos or the ethics. So that's I guess what my objection is. My objection ultimately just comes down to this: when from the Protestant framework, whatever objection that you make is the same objection which is made back to you, and this is the question of authority, and it's a really bad conundrum that Protestants have to deal with. Now, you can dispute it or you can have reasons for it or things like this. And I'm not going to really question any of those because I don't think it's that necessary. What I think is necessary, though, is that there is an admittance that this kind of inherent thing does exist there. And it just works like this: the standard and ultimate authority from which I judge all other authorities is this: I, as the interpreter of this, who is imbued with the Holy Spirit while I'm looking at this thing, right? Judge that what it means to say is thus. But anytime you say that, that same exact objection can then be used back against you. And there's no way to dispute it because ultimately, logically, you're saying the same exact thing to each other. And that's where the idea of the breakdown of normative authority comes from. And we don't really act like this in any other aspect of society. So when you're talking about normative authority, I'm sure that you think that the president needs to have normative authority, at least to some degree. He needs to fight just wars. So if he sends people off to die, you want to justify their death by saying that was a just war. Perhaps in the legal system, you want to have some normative authority. You want normative authority in society in a general sense. But then also somehow what's left out of that is the normative authority in the spiritual sense. And that's where I think the collective breakdown begins to shift.
yeah,
Most wallets still plug into the same system we were trying to escape in the first place. And that's why Rumble built Rumble Wallet. It's a self custodial wallet that lives inside an ecosystem that actually defends free speech and financial freedom. No bank holding your balance, not even Rumble can touch your funds. This is your money on your keys, on your terms. So if you're serious about sovereignty, financial and digital, this is where you level up. Go to wallet.rumble.com or search Rumble Wallet in your app store, download it, back up your recovery phrase, and move your money where it belongs, in your hands.
Yeah, I would agree, like, and this is where, again, I'm coming from a little bit of a different angle from yourself because I actually agree with what the reformers were doing early on because they weren't necessarily, wanting to be rebellious against God and his word, but it was against the power of how it was being abused. And, looking from a Christian point of view anyway, when you're being suppressed and you're being told, what you have to do, even back in those days, if I remember reading this correctly, that people were forced, they were forced to go to church. If you didn't go to church, it was almost as if like your salvation was being questioned, right? And to even question their authority was dangerous. And the Bible, does talk about people who are in leadership, not to lord over them, like, like suppressing them. Even Peter talks about that in his epistle. And so I understand why the Reformation, at least the initiation of, when you're talking about the word authority is because I've been in ministry, I've been a pastor, I've been an elder, so I know what it's like to be in a church ministry and leadership position in the past. And at the same time, you know, you don't want to be a control freak over the people. Yet sadly, it happens in any church. It happens in all churches, right? No matter where you're at. And so I
See,
understand.
I don't know.
Yeah.
It's like I have a different view on this. I think you do
Okay,
want to
what's your
be
view?
something of a control freak. Like, and let me
Mhm.
explain what I mean by this.
Okay, go ahead.
So when like you have children, do you have children?
No, we do not. No.
Okay. But I mean, obviously you were a child and you had parents.
That's how
Yeah,
yeah.
I'll tell you how it was when I was a kid. Um, my dad would tell me to do something, and I often would get mouthy. Like, "Oh, yeah? Well, why should I have to do that?" And what he'd do is he'd reach over and he'd give me a good old-fashioned open-handed smack across the mouth, and then he would say, "Because I said so, dumbass."
That's
And
right.
I would go do it because my dad was the ultimate authority. He was the ultimate normative authority in our household. He was the head. And he didn't brook any nonsense, right? He would say, "No, you're going to do it, and that's that, and I'm not going to endlessly justify myself to you because I'm in a position where I don't have to do that. Ha ha."
Mhm.
And ultimately, what was funny about that is that everything that my father did in retrospect, on my behalf, including the discipline, including in some cases unjustly disciplining me, was always done from the perspective of my interests. Because he loved me, because he wanted to see me do well, because he wanted to see me move in the proper way in the world. And when I wasn't doing that, he thought it was completely appropriate to take matters into his own hands and make me do that. And God bless him for that, because ultimately, I think that society would be a much better place if we had more parents who did do that, who did kind of butt their way in, who did say, "Why don't you stop doing this nonsense and this type of thing, or else." I think that that's
Yeah.
fine. And so it's through views like that where I start to realize that when we say authority and things like this in the United States, we give it like an ugly word. We associate it with ugliness, with oppression, tyranny, with things like that.
Right.
And I think that that's broadly the wrong way to look at things. I think that normative authority is probably usually good, and that we probably want to have more of that around, not less of that. We want moral idealism and things like this to have authorities around it, which can help us move through life.
Oh, I would agree with you in the issue of authority and respect in that regard. I don't think I'd agree with the smack in the face part, but I understand what you're saying. When I was growing up, I don't know how I'm 55 next month. How old are you, Andrew?
42.
Okay. When I was growing up, when I 'cause I was kind of sometimes a rebellious kid. I got the belt. I got the belt. I never got smacked with a hand, not that I can remember anyway. But I got the belt quite a few times.
I got the belt too.
And yeah, and it wasn't fun. Um, but my dad did it
But did
when
you
he
have it
did it back
coming?
in oh yeah, it
Yeah.
was definitely deserved. I never
Yeah.
got it when it I didn't get it when I never got
Right.
it when it wasn't deserved,
Right.
yeah. My dad was actually he had lots of faults, as we all do. But when he did do it, he meant it to do it for the right reason, like I think it's Proverbs 22, about disciplining a child. So I do understand that part. The part of where I would disagree with you, though, in this part, back to the authority of the issue with the church and things like that as Christians, though, is though we are in the scriptures instructed to follow our leaders and follow those who are, over us, but at the same time, we're also told to be careful to not be led astray, to be careful of what we listen to be careful, not to be, you know, just being lorded over like the scripture says. And so there's got to be a check and a balance with that. I hope you'd agree there. But the problem with,
Not sure that I do actually. So,
well, let me finish my
oh,
statement, please.
yeah,
Let me
yeah,
finish.
go ahead.
So some of what when you were talking to Jared, what's his show
Gerald.
called again?
Gerald.
Gerald,
Mhm.
apologizing,
Gerald apologizes apologetics.
yeah, but not really. That was pretty funny.
Mhm.
When you were talking with
He's
him, and
sorry about that, by the way.
it's a funny show. There was lots of things, both things were being stated at times that I agreed because, as much as I like when he said he goes to a good, fellowship right now, I've been a part of very good fellowship, good leadership, and I've seen some really good things. I've seen some that I've been a part of over the years that are not good, right? So I understand both sides of the coin. But the Bible still does instruct us that we are to be careful of those who watch over us, that we're not supposed to be just being like, control freaks being over us. And so the Bible is also very clear that the leaders are not supposed to be like that. So
Well, who gets to
looking
make the
back,
judgment that the leader's like that?
well, when, let's say, for example, back in the Catholic time, when they're being suppressed and they're not being able to read the Bible and they're being controlled, what they can and cannot do. They're being forced to go to church, or they were being lied to about the indulgences that would get people apparently, out of purgatory faster, and they were making a lot of money off of
Yeah, but
people
who
back
gets
in
to
the.
make the decision that those things are wrong is my question.
Well, let me ask you, what do you think? Would
Well,
you
that's answering the question with a question.
the answer for me is are those things what the scriptures teach,
Well,
right? Like that would be.
that's not helpful. So the idea is, yeah, I'm just looking at it from a logical perspective, right?
So we're just
Who
supposed to
gets
do whatever. Okay,
who gets to
let me
make
answer it this way, Andrew.
the decision that authority is corrupt, or the decision that the authority is wrong, or the decision
So 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 who
who's ultimately making that determination is the question.
well, let me ask, so I'll answer it like this. Well, who told me the Catholic Church was the authority? Who told me the Orthodox Church is the authority? See,
That actually
okay, so
moves
let
to
me
my
just
point, though.
no, just let me finish my point. Um, Somebody can claim their authority. Somebody could claim they're the one true church. If I'm an outsider, why should I believe that?
Yeah,
Like, if I'm on the outside and someone's
but
saying
this
that.
is circular, my friend. So,
No, it goes my point that I'm trying to say is if I can read some, and I wanna use this very liberally, but at the same time mean it. If I can read scriptures that are pretty straightforward and simple and
what if you couldn't?
different, well, what we're talking about right now,
Yeah, but what if
right?
you couldn't? What if you couldn't read?
Well, if I couldn't
Then
read,
who's
but
the
then that's
authority? But if you couldn't, then who would be the authority then?
if you couldn't read, then unfortunately at the time you would have to go off of whatever someone said,
So then
and
you
if they were
wouldn't be.
telling you the truth, then you're okay. If they were
s-
telling you a lie, then you're gonna be in
So
trouble.
who's the authority then?
And the authority is you are still going along with it, but I
So
mean,
you're the ultimate
w
authority again.
okay, well, then you tell me, Andrew, who's the authority?
Well, the question isn't whether or not, or what Andrew thinks is the authority or not the authority. The question is whether or not the entire Protestant worldview boils down to them, the individual's self, being the ultimate authority. And if that creates the breakdown in the social dynamics and in society because of this one idea of ultimate authority. In other words, the objection to objection works like this. I don't believe that you're an authority. I object. I don't believe that
Okay,
you're reading this right because I object. But my
okay,
objections are based on, let's say, these 15 passages from scripture that I've contextualized this way. Well, nothing stops the other side who you're objecting to from using the same exact objection back, and it becomes unfalsifiable. That's the
Right.
problem, is that there's no falsifiability. And so Christian ethics breaks down because of that. Christian
I understand.
ethics, like all other ethical system, relies on the philosophical traditions of the applied normative applications of those conditions. So virtue in a vacuum is meaningless. Virtue has to be applied for it to be meaningful, right? And if there's no authority on what virtues are, if there's no way for us to make those determinations, then all we do endlessly is just have this same objection back and forth. I'm the ultimate arbiter on what is ethical and moral. You are not. And so that's where the breakdown comes in.
So let me ask you a simple question, Andrew. Why should I believe anything you tell me today?
Why should you believe it?
Yeah, if you're not, if, are you my authority or who's my authority?
I don't
I'm just
I,
asking an actual question.
I
Being,
don't know
yeah.
what does this have to do with anything.
Well, I'm just trying to use it as an illustration of like.
Did you
So
did
again,
you did you want to discuss these issues? Because if you did, then you're already presupposing that I'm going to be saying something to you, which you're going to
well,
have to believe or not believe, right?
I'm just asking a question. If we're talking about authority, if someone claims to be authority,
Mm.
why should I believe them? That's what I'm trying to ask.
Well, there could be a lot of different reasons why you should believe them. Depends on what the metrics are that you value for belief. Is it if it's so? For instance, I'm guessing that if your doctor tells you you have cancer, you believe him.
Most likely, if he shows
Why?
me some X-rays or something, yeah. And if
Oh,
he just
okay. So,
says it,
well,
yeah,
well, if
yeah,
he just says it, wouldn't you still
yeah.
believe him? Why would you
But
disbelieve him?
I could also, but I could choose to go to a different doctor if I wanted to.
You
I could
could,
choose a
but
different
that's
doctor,
not my
right? Yeah.
question. My question is, why would you believe your doctor if he came in the room without showing you anything? He's like, "Hey, man, I got some bad news. You have cancer." You would likely
Right.
believe him. Why?
Because he's a doctor.
Yeah, right. So you've imbued
Mhm.
authority in him immediately,
Okay.
and there's some
Right.
sort of you even give him some sort of normative authority, some sort of
Okay.
like moral authority that you're imbuing in him as well. So you're giving just to the title, just to the very
Right.
title itself, you're giving
I
authority to it.
understand that. I understand that. So then if I'm in a room and I've got a Catholic priest and an Orthodox priest and a Protestant, and they're all telling me something, which one should I believe?
Again, this is a what you're asking here is an oversimplification. About what? About what and why? And so when you're asking about questions of belief, what you're asking for is you're asking for sequences of justifications. When you say belief, what does that mean? You now have faith in? Is that what
Well,
that
like,
means?
well, the illustration you're using with a doctor, right?
Yeah.
I'm saying if I'm talking to, let's just even narrow it down just to 2. Let's just say the Catholic Church and the Orthodox. Both claim to be the authority.
Mm.
Both claim to be the one true church, you know that.
So you would want
So,
evidences then? Is that what you mean?
well, I'd should I just assume, like, is it the first one I talk to that
I
I
don't
just
I
go
don't know
I
how I'm supposed to assist you in the things that you value for truth. Like,
right.
if you're asking me what should I believe, I'm assuming you believe in some theory of truth, correspondence theory, something like this. Like correspondence theory would be that which corresponds with reality is true. Something similar to that. Is
No,
that
I'm just talking like we're going back to the word authority you brought up,
yeah,
we
but
well,
if
again,
it wouldn't no,
it's
we're not though. We're talking about
it's
we're talking about
well,
belief, not just authority, because
but it was your original
you're
question.
asking me who should I believe?
Right, but that
Belief
goes back to authority,
yeah,
right?
maybe, but you're asking a different question, and the question is
Because you
about
well, I'm just
hang on, the question's about
oh, go ahead, go
belief.
ahead, go ahead, go ahead.
The question here now is about belief. So if you're
Yeah,
asking me, why should I believe something or how should I believe something,
yeah,
then we would have to start by the metrics that you value for truth claims. And then we would
right.
know what those metrics are to tell you who you should or shouldn't believe about X, Y, or Z.
But going back to the authority thing that you brought up, it's part of the conversation, actually, it's goes back to the Reformation, right? Authority. So if I'm say I'm not even religious right now, say I'm just using hypothetical, and I'm talking to people who, one person's Catholic, one person's Orthodox, and they're both telling me, "Hey, this is the truth. This is the true church. This is the authority." You know, my question, I'm just trying to simplify it, is if I'm gonna go to either church, why should I believe both? Because both are claiming the same thing. So how do I determine? Can I determine it, or do I just assume?
Yeah, I'll give you listen. Let me steel man what you're saying so that you know I'm not getting it wrong, and then you can correct me if I get the steel man wrong. Okay,
Sure,
before I
go
say
ahead.
anything else.
Sure.
What you're asking me is, Andrew, if I have a Catholic priest and an Orthodox priest and some Protestant bishop from Church XYZ, whatever, right? And all three of them are telling me a different thing, and they all claim to be a normative authority in the thing. Who should I believe? Is that right?
Who and why? Yeah,
Yeah, who and why should I believe them?
correct.
The problem with this question is that it actually doesn't give me enough details to answer it because when you have a loaded word thrown in there, belief. So what I'm asking you about belief, what convinces you, I'm guessing is what you believe, or I don't know. What does belief here mean?
Well, so going back to the original conversation here of where it all began here about the Reformation stuff is you talked about the word authority. So I remember how you brought it up. It came up somewhere, and that's where it all comes down to who determines, what authority. And what I'm trying to ask you
Yeah, I know what you're
is
trying to ask me. I just steel manned it. I'm asking you, when
no,
you
no,
say
but
the
I'm
word
but I'm
belief,
just
what does that
I'm
mean?
just
What does
I know
belief mean here?
I'm just saying what I've said out loud as I'm talking, just so you understand. So what I'm asking you is I'm like saying, look, well, in order to understand what the Bible says, how do I know who has the right authority?
Yeah.
Like, why should I believe
Kelly, if I
the
say I don't
Catholic Church?
believe you,
Yeah,
I'm questioning that means that whatever the structure is for how I value truth claims, you have fallen short of those.
yeah.
Do you agree with that? So for me,
Say that again. Go ahead.
for truth claims, I would say I mix correspondence theory with a couple other things, but an easy one, just correspondence theory, that which corresponds with reality. Kelly, I don't believe you. I'm saying what you're saying right now doesn't correspond with reality. That's what I'm
Okay,
saying when I say I don't believe you. So when we're talking
okay,
about the idea of belief here, when you're saying, why should I believe you? This is going to be set and determined by things that convince you. And I don't know what your
right.
truth theory is or things like that. I don't
Sure,
know how I'm supposed to
right.
explain this to you.